Welcome back everyone, Alex Javaris here. In this video I'm going to be showing you how to achieve really vibrant colour in your paintings. To do so, I'm going to be completing an alla prima oil painting of these bright orange tangerines. The colours I'll be using are titanium white, cadmium lemon, cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, cadmium red, alizarin crimson, transparent oxide red, viridian and ultramarine blue, all by Michael Harding. I'm going to start by placing a warm ground made with transparent oxide red and ultramarine mixed with solvent. But before we get really into this, I'd just like to apologise if it's been a while since my last video. I've been having to focus on my Patreon channel, as the demos on there are all filmed in real time, so they take quite a lot longer to make. And most recently, I've been working on my Essentials of Colour course, which is what made me decide to make this video, because I'm going to be talking about a key principle for achieving really vibrant, realistic colours that I cover on that course: broken colour. Here, I'm taking one of my smaller soft head brushes and some of the transparent red oxide. And I'm going to start mapping out my subject with a few simple lines, placing the top, bottom and sides of the whole subject, then the main areas of light and dark. Notice how I'm ignoring the glass bowl and I'm not drawing each individual tangerine. I'm treating this as a visual impression, so I'm looking at light and dark shapes, not objects. Next, I'm going to use one of my larger brushes to mix a warm dark colour made with transparent oxide red and ultramarine, which I'm using to mass in all of the darks with the same even tone, establishing the overall light and dark pattern. And here I'm gently wiping over the darks to even them out and remove some of the brush marks. With the darks massed in, I'm next going to mass in the lights, starting with the brightest, most intense colour that I see, the light side of the tangerines. This is a really warm orange, made with cadmium yellow and cadmium red. That may be just a little too intense. So here I'm neutralising it ever so slightly with a touch of ultramarine. Once I'm happy with the colour, I'll use it to block in the rest of the tangerines. After the tangerines, I'm next going to mix a colour for the grey cloth in the background. I see this as a neutral grey violet, so I'm using ultramarine blue, titanium white, alizarin and some transparent oxide red to neutralise it. I'll start by placing some of this background colour next to the edges of the topmost tangerine and the tangerine in the foreground. These are the two most prominent edges in this whole painting and the areas of greatest contrast. Notice how blue this grey appears when placed next to the bright orange. I'm now mixing a much warmer neutral colour, which I'm going to use for the foreground, made with ultramarine, transparent oxide red and a little yellow ochre. I can also see a gradation in the foreground as it moves closer to the light source. So here I'm mixing a cooler, lighter version of my foreground colour containing more yellow ochre, which I'm using to make the foreground lighter as it moves towards the right. Next, I'm going to start mixing a colour for the cast shadow behind the bowl on the left. I see this as a much darker version of the violet background colour, and it's also warmer, containing more red. Here I'm mixing another colour for the background, which is a value in between the cast shadow and my original background colour. I'm using this new colour to add a gradation in the background, moving from the lightest part in the middle just above the tangerines towards both the left and the right where it gets darker. I also want you to notice that as well as a shift in value, there's a subtle shift in colour. From a more blue-grey violet in the lightest part of the background towards a warmer colour that contains more red as it gets darker. Here I'm making the lighter middle part of the background even lighter. With the background covered, the only parts that still need to be blocked in are the shadows on the tangerines. Despite being darks, the shadows on these tangerines are still really colourful. So here I'm mixing a very warm orange-brown, which I'm going to use to mass in the darkest parts of the shadows that I see of the tangerine in the foreground and the tangerines in the bowl. Right, here I'm mixing a greener version of my shadow colour. And I'm going to place some of this cooler colour within the shadows of the tangerine. Which brings me to the point of this video, that it's impossible to capture the exact quality of a colour like the shadow of this tangerine using just a single mixture. If you look closely, you will find several different colours. In fact, what usually happens is at first glance you'll see one colour, orange, and when you look again you'll see another, green. So the colour appears to vibrate. So for a colourful object like this tangerine to appear lifelike, you will need several different colours placed next to each other within each value. This technique is often referred to as broken colour. Here I'm mixing a warm orange colour, which is a value in between the shadows and the lights on the tangerines. I'm using this middle value for some of the edges in between the shadows and the lights on the tangerines in order to round their form. And now I'm mixing a much cooler greener middle value, which I'm going to use for the edge of the shadow on one of the tangerines. So I now have two separate colours, a warm and a cool version, for both the shadows of the tangerines and the midtones in between the lights and the shadows. And there will probably be more colours, not only in the shadows and the mids, but also in all the other values. But before I start looking for more variations in colour, there's one more main value that I need to add, the highlights on the tangerines. I see these as having a pink colour, which I'm making with titanium white and cadmium red. With the highlights added, I now have a total of around 5 or 6 main values. From here, I'm going to start refining these larger value shapes by finding smaller colour notes in between them. For instance, I see a really soft edge at the top of the uppermost tangerine where it's almost completely lost against the background. This means that there is a value transition in between the light side of the tangerine and the background behind it, and there will also be a colour shift within this transition. Here I'm mixing a warmer pink-violet colour. And I'm placing some along the edge of the tangerine. As I add these different colour notes, I'm trying to be really careful to maintain their tonal value. I don't want to start mixing too many values. In fact, if I could summarise this video in one sentence, it would be keep the values simple, use as few as possible, then look for variation in colour within each value. Right, here I'm scraping back my palette. As you can see, my colours have all started to get mixed into each other and are turning into mud. If I want clean colours, I don't want this mud to end up on my canvas. So a big part of keeping your colours clean is keeping your palette clean, which I'll usually do several times during a painting session. Once my palette is clean, I'll start mixing fresh colours. Here I'm mixing more of the bright orange for the light side of the tangerines. When you remix colours, it doesn't matter too much if they aren't an exact match. As long as they're the right value, a slight difference will add to the sense of variation. And as you search for different colour notes, you can actually be quite bold. If you think you see a note of pink or green, add a touch of bright green. Then see how it looks. If it's too much, remove some of it, or try to balance it out with a more neutral version or a note of a warmer colour like the orange. There's really only one way to get the hang of this, and that's to experiment. Here I'm mixing a really bright green that's the same value as the light side of the tangerine, made with viridian and cadmium yellow. I'm going to place some of this green in the light side of the tangerine in the foreground. But that's a little too much, so here I'm going back over part of this green note with some of my bright orange. I'm now placing a slightly darker version of this green next to the warm mid-tone in between the shadows and the lights. And do you see how this interplay of green and orange blends together optically to create a more vibrant colour, which makes this tangerine appear much more colourful? If I were to use just one orange mixture for the lights on these tangerines, they wouldn't appear as realistic. In order to capture their true quality, I need to use a combination of colours. This idea of having several colours working together is really important if you want to accurately represent colourful subjects like these tangerines. Here I'm mixing a warmer version of my lighter background colour. And I'm placing a few notes of this warmer colour in the background just above the tangerines to add some variation. You don't necessarily need a lot of variation. Sometimes all it takes is a note of a cool colour within a warm shadow, or a warm within a cool. But if you want, you can also really push it and add a lot of variation using some really strong colours. As long as all your colours are the right value and you achieve the right balance between warm and cool and intense colours and more neutral colours. Right, after adding some of the different colours that I see within my large value shapes and refining the edges in between them, I'm now ready to start working on the details in the glass bowl. Here I'm mixing a really light pink highlight colour, which I'm using for the brightest highlight just under the rim of the bowl. I'm now mixing another green highlight colour made with Viridian and Titanium White. And I'm placing some of this green in the highlight on the bowl. So even this lightest highlight will still have some colour variation within it. As I continue to place small details in the bowl, I'm being really careful not to include every single reflection that I can see in the glass. I don't want to distract from my main centres of interest, the hard edges on the tangerines. I'm now taking some of my warm orange mid-tone, and I'm placing some notes of orange in the foreground where it's being reflected back off the tangerines. Next, I'm going to add a bit more variation in the background, particularly in the cast shadow behind the bowl, where I see a definite colour shift from red to blue as it moves away from the bowl. And finally, I'm adding a few last details. A refraction in the glass that I can see just below the edge of the top tangerine. And a really subtle reflected light in the shadow in between the tangerines inside the bowl. And with that, I think this demo is just about finished. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to like and subscribe if you did. And check out my Patreon channel if you want to see more demos like this one that have been filmed in real time so you can see exactly how I did them. Until next time, good luck with your painting and thanks for watching.